Good morning and welcome viewers to P.S. Paul Stewart, a show where we bring souls together to talk about life, to share experiences and wisdoms, and in the hope that we inspire and uplift and help people be their best selves. So I'm Paul Stewart. I'm a facilitator. I use personal training, mentoring, coaching, and tools that I've picked up through my travels to help people. And today, we have a wonderful experience ahead of us with two guests. In the second half, we'll be talking to Tabaash, a non-physical teacher, and he'll be sharing his teachings and also perhaps answering some questions. But right now, first of all, we're going to speak to his channel. Welcome, Blair Styra.
Well, how you doing? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Blair, and welcome back, and great to see you, and welcome from everyone.
Thank you. Yeah. Happy New Year to everybody. And just, isn't it great that we've got a whole new platform that we can create something new from?
Yeah, it is. Well, thanks, Blair. And look, today I'd love to talk a bit about grief, loss, dying. I know you've kind of studied that in your life quite a lot, and you've actually participated or been part of with Tabaash and a medical doctor, I believe, in teaching about grief, loss, and dying. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, very, very good friend of mine who I've known for well over 30 years, Dr. Hetty Rodenberg. And Hetty and Tabaash have facilitated a workshop on grief and spirituality over the years. And we've presented that around New Zealand. Hetty started off as an anaesthetist, and then she went into general practice. And then gradually, as she developed in spirituality, she went into working with a woman called Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who was pretty much the pioneer for modern day hospice care. Anyway, Hetty and I, we hang out a lot, and we came up with this idea. Wouldn't it be great if we could collaborate and present this workshop? So we did, and it's been really extraordinary. We've had such a variety of different people participating in this, not just obviously people who want to understand about grief. We've even had medical practitioners who deal in those fields who want to have a greater understanding about how to, blend the orthodox aspect of medicine with the spiritual aspect of it when it comes to palliative care and, of course, the whole process of dying. And it's been amazing because you meet the most extraordinary people, and of course, some of the journeys people have had, particularly with those who've lost people, whether it's through traumatic events or cancer or whatever. Everyone has this amazing story. And so, the sharing that they've been able to give is obviously part of their healing as well. So, so Hetty and I are in cahoots at the moment, once again, looking at, organizing something. And I look forward to working with her more. So.
Oh, very good. What type of things do people come with in grief? I mean, we often think of the obvious things, but...
I've had people who had family members who've been murdered. So, that has quite all grief is raw, but that has particular edge of rawness to it. People who died in like massive traumatic experiences and events. I remember a story Hetty was telling about when she was doing this workshop, and this woman who was an older lady came, and her son and wife and grandchildren had all been killed in a car accident. And it was rather awful, actually. What had happened was that they'd been somewhere in a very built-up area in, I can't remember what country it was, and this truck suddenly stopped in front of them, and this big sheet of iron just came through and decapitated the whole family all at once. And this woman, she never really processed the grief, and so with the love and the care of those around her, she was able to um, relieve herself of the pain she was feeling. Obviously, you can't get rid of something like that. That's always going to be a part of your experience. And we've had family or particular parents who've lost young children. Trying to understand the whole process, but also I think a lot of people came because it's not so much that they're looking for answers, but they just want to understand just exactly what this vibration is. And obviously anyone who comes to something like this has an understanding. They're not just going to go and see what happens. I think they are there because they have a belief system and they want to use that to plug into more understanding, more support, more love.
Yeah. Do you think with all the changes that we're seeing in the world and some of the challenges we're facing, there's been a little more grief on the surface?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's actually been really important when you think about, the catalyst that we all experienced last year and are still experiencing. There's been this massive dismantling of everything that's been familiar to us. And so it's shown up that grief is so many different things. You don't just grieve because someone's died. Everything that we've known that has been normal to us suddenly has, been taken away to a certain degree. And therefore, we're suffering. We're suffering from in a grief of the familiarity of that, certain social structures that we're no longer involved in quite the same way. The freedom that's been curtailed. People aren't able to travel, obviously, in quite the same way. And obviously, people who've lost their jobs, there's grief around that. I think in some cases there's grief in regards to having to establish new routines. And that sounds a funny way of putting it, but think about it. Most people are involved in structures and routines and repetitive patterns which present them through the day in particular ways. And so suddenly they're forced, I suppose, into having to change all that, but also to participate in relationships which perhaps they've been using those structures as a way of avoiding. And so there's just so much that's been presented. And I think, as a collective, humanity's grieving for itself. And yet that doesn't necessarily mean it's a wrong thing, because, in order to evolve, we have to experience, we have to feel. And that's just a natural part of things. But the natural state of life is to be clear, is to be peaceful, is to stand in harmony in one situation. So, most human beings tend to get involved in their emotional experience around life. And therefore they bring overt vibrations through their system, which in a long-term sense are not compatible with what we are naturally. So that therefore becomes counterproductive to our possibilities. And so I think, have your moment, but know when to put it down and know when to, create the next reality. But I think human nature is, well, I know Tabaash talks about this, where he says, for most human beings, they're very involved in third dimensional frequency, which is the dimension of karma, emotions, human nature, conflict, very conflict-based. And so, of course, people's responses to life situations tend to come from the third dimensional energy. And self-development, of course, has taught us that we can actually access other dimensions, which are rather like turning lights on. And therefore, when you turn lights on, you're able to realize that, oh, hang on a minute, I actually have choice here. I can have my moment, but I don't want to drag that around me for the rest of my life. So, grief is an essential part of our experience. The way that we choose to grieve is going to define exactly how we step forward. And I find it interesting, just in my observations, experiences, etc., reading, investigations, the different ways different cultures actually look at grief, different religions look at grief, in the belief systems. So, right through human history, there's always been a ritual around grief. And,
Mhm.
and so obviously some of those rituals are more productive than others. And obviously if you only look at life from the human perspective, then you create what I just call a very sanitized way of grieving, where it's all very compartmentalized and tidied up and there's no real emotion attached to it. And then you look at other cultures where it's a very open, productive. It's like a party in a sense,
Mhm.
and because they also understand the soul's next experience is to just move on into another frequency.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that there's such a thing as a right or wrong way about grieving. Obviously it's up to each individual, but when we embrace the idea of our God nature as natural, then obviously we realize that when we pass into spirit, we just simply go, as Tabaash puts it, to another state of consciousness, which I think that makes a lot of sense to me. Rather than it's like some place that you sort of make sure you book your place, your place in there when you go. But yeah, so it's a state of consciousness.
Mm. Blair, you've had your own recent changes or experiences in this particular area. Respectfully, would you share with us
Yes, absolutely.
experience?
So for those who aren't in the picture, my wife Kay had Alzheimer's for 10 years. I looked after her for 6 years, and then she went into a care home for 4 years. In August last year, August the 29th, she passed into spirit. And it was an interesting sort of experience from my perspective. I suppose you could say, I've been channeling publicly for the last 34 years, but then I had also been self-developing. So in a way, it's like I've been preparing myself for all this sort of thing most of my life. So when the care home rang me up and said, look, Kay is deteriorating. And it was during the time where it was the second lockdown here in New Zealand up in Auckland. The rest of the country was fine. But when they had that lockdown, it was only level 2. They put all care homes into level 4 because of the high risk factor. But they said to me, look, as long as you stay away from any common areas, we're going to allow you to come up. And so I didn't feel I needed to rush into anything. I didn't sort of drop everything and make a bedside vigil. So I would go up and see Kay every day after work. And they had her sitting up in her wheelchair, and they had her dressed and groomed, etc. But I was just looking at her and thinking, yeah, you're heading home now. Everything about her was just, it was like she was shrinking within herself. And yet I remember one day I was just sitting with her and holding her hand, and I looked into her eyes, and there was still so much life in there. Even though the body was pretty much gone, the life in her eyes, but the weariness that I saw, was very, very evident. And Kay was always quite a strong, determined person. And it wasn't that she gave up. It was like she was now ready. She was resigned to the fact that, right, I'm going to go now. Anyway, and then she slept a lot, and then invariably they put her to bed and asleep. She slept for about a week before she passed. So I would just go up there, and I would sit in her room, and they have a TV in these places, and I could have sat there and done that, but I was just sort of thinking, if Kate sort of passed to the sort of sounds of a reality TV show, she probably wouldn't be so happy about that. So I thought, I've got to be productive about this. So I actually read to her. And so I sat and read Jonathan Livingston Seagull to her. And I'd just read a couple of pages, and then I would sit and I would hold her hand and give her a kiss and stroke her forehead and, things like that. And I remember once they have this little sponge on a stick to keep the mouth and the lips moist, you see. And so I had done this, and I had just put the sponge in Kay's mouth just to moisten up the palate. And all of a sudden she clamped down on the stick like this, and I couldn't get it out. So I'm sort of trying to pull this thing out. And she's totally unconscious, and yet there's this part of her that's like, ugh. And I was laughing, thinking, oh God, after all these years, she's going to end up dying choking by swallowing a piece of sponge. Anyway, so I managed to prise. I'm like, open your mouth, Anyway, so I finally got that out. And then I remember sitting there thinking that I should be feeling a whole lot of things, but I remember thinking I wasn't really feeling anything. I was just feeling. And when it comes to being with someone who's dying, I don't know, when you're a spiritual person, you probably assume that you're going to feel all these spirits around them, and Kay's going to have a beatific smile on her face or something like that. But it was just sort of normal, really. Mm. And they had the staff had put this little atomizer, which was sending out pleasant scents, but it was this atomizer that had several different music channels available to it, you see. So I'm just sort of thinking, what sort of music would Kay like to die by? Sort of stuff. So, all these sort of little funny things like that. Anyway, on the Saturday, the 29th, I distinctly remember waking up thinking, yeah, this is the day. This is the day she's going to go. And I'd had 2 clients to do in the morning, and I had considered cancelling them, but I thought, no, I think Kay will wait. So I did my my work, and then I drove up there, and I just went and sat with her. This was probably about midday, and her breathing was I suppose it was quite gentle and quite normal. She was just lying slightly on her side. It's a beautiful day. And so again, I just read to her and held her hand, and staff were coming in and out, and then about 2:45, I noticed that her breathing had changed. I'd been a volunteer at our local hospice for a year, so I recognized what the old days they used to call the death rattle. And I just remember, well, this is it. So I just took her hands, and the moment I took her hands, she just took 3 quite deep breaths and then went. And I just held on to her hands, and I suppose the best way to put it is I loved her into spirit. And then, just held her hands for a while and just looked at her. I didn't feel upset or particularly grieving or anything of that nature. I actually felt her peace. And, that was an interesting point. When I walked into the room that day, she was lying there, as I said, breathing, but her eyes were wide open. And I remember going up, sort of looking at her and going like that, but she didn't blink at all. And I thought, how bizarre. It's almost like some of her had already gone. Most of her had already gone. And there's maybe this little part of her soul that was still aligned to the body, waiting for me. And so, as much as I tried to close her eyes, she wouldn't even blink. If I touched her eyes, wouldn't blink. And so I thought that was quite interesting. Anyway, then I called the staff, and they came and did what they needed to do. And I remember sitting there thinking about the completion of our journey. We had 42 years together, and just this whole sense of relief for her, for myself as well, because that last 10 years was not particularly, well, it was pretty arduous at times. And then just all practical things, kicked in, having to ring up family and friends and stuff like that. And it was actually, she had a really beautiful, elegant passing, actually. So I came home, again, not feeling particularly upset or anything. And one of my mates was waiting outside. So we came inside and I was full of energy, full of, I suppose, the power of life. And I just couldn't settle. And I said to my mate, look, I can't be here. I have to go and have a drink somewhere. Let's just go down to one of the local bars. So we did. We went to this lovely little bar called the Hawthorne Lounge. So went to the bar and I actually ordered a bottle of champagne because I wanted to celebrate Kay's life. So my mate and I were sitting there and the guy's pouring. He goes, oh, you celebrating something? You've had a really amazing day. And I looked at him and said, well, actually, I've had a shit of a day. Like that. And he said, oh, what's wrong? I said, oh, my wife just passed away 2 hours ago. And literally he sort of stopped in mid-pour. And he sort of looked at me and you know, when you respond, I suppose, in that way I did, you know, that's not the normal way that people would tend to respond when someone's passed. Anyway, I explained the situation to him. And anyway, he gave us a bit of a wide berth after that. But you know, my mate and I, we just sat there and we talked about Kay and we told Kay stories and we toasted her. And it just felt the most appropriate thing to do. And you know, I didn't feel I wanted to go home and sob my eyes out, and I just didn't feel that at all, you know. And I didn't particularly feel Kay around at all, you know. I wasn't expecting to, you know. I was thinking, wow, you've been incarcerated in that body all those years, and so I'm sure the last thing you want to do is come back and go, hi, how you going? So just before I went to bed, well, I just remember sitting and just putting my thought out to Kay and thanking her for being in my life and saying to her, well, you know, I hope everything's cool with you now. And, you know, at some point, you just let me know you're around. And so over the next couple of days, you know, arrangements to make, that sort of thing. And yeah, I had my moments. I suppose the thing that struck me the most was her actual permanent removal from my life. Whereas, you know, up to that point, even though she was living in a care home, I was still seeing her every day. And even though I was spending 10, at the most an hour with her, she was still a part of my life. So I suppose the routine was still there in a sense. And now that routine wasn't there. And so I remember one night I was sitting and I was just making some amendments to the funeral plan. And it was in the evening. And as I was writing out this poem, I just suddenly felt overwhelmed with my loss. And so I just sort of sitting there feeling not so good, and my eyes closed. And all of a sudden I felt arms around me. And I looked up and there was one of my best friends, Omar. And he was just holding me. And I thought, where'd you come from? Like this. And he says, well, he says, it's the strangest thing. I was just driving by your place and I had this immense sense I had to come in. And he said, and the door was open. And I don't remember leaving the door open. And so isn't it interesting? It's like these little signals that you put out. Yeah. And yeah, so that was really beautiful. But even now, you know, it's been 4 months since Kate passed. I've not felt this overwhelming need to feel sad or to have deep grief. And I never even got to the point where I was thinking, maybe I'm repressing something. So I remember having a meditation, trying to sort of squeeze some sadness out or squeeze some grief out. It's got to be in there somewhere, Blair. But I just couldn't find it. And then afterwards I thought, well, this is just the way you deal with it. You know, you understand, you know, that Kay's just gone home. And I must admit, I've always had a feeling of her being somewhere. And so I know that she's somewhere. I know she's actually fine. And a couple of times she's let herself or let me know she's around, usually on my phone, where a photograph of her suddenly pops up on my phone. And it's always a photograph of how she was before she got sick. And I took a lot of photos of her while she was in the care home and during the 10 years. but every photo is prior to that, as if she's saying, look, I'm fine now, everything is cool.
Interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I remember the day after I picked up her ashes and sitting there and looking at them thinking, grief is so many different things. It's lots of different ideas, it's different feelings. We write our own stories around it. You know, it's sensations, it's opportunities. And that's when I suddenly thought, oh, this is a really good material for my third book.
Mm.
Tabaash and myself are once again co-writing a book, because we co-wrote the first one and then I did the second one. And so we're writing this book on grief and spirituality together. So I do a chapter about my story, and then Tabaash kicks in and he does a chapter on the material I've been writing, or his perspective of things, basically. Oh. So, yeah, and it's interesting because I've never lost anybody before, which, you know, all these years of working with spirit and dealing with people who've gone through loss, and yet this is my first experience with it. And I didn't have any particular expectations of it, but it's surprised me perhaps a bit how even I am with it. And like, it's like I know within me that everything's cool, everything's fine. And when I've been doing my channeling work with Tabaash through the week, there have been times where I've come back knowing absolutely that I've been with Kay. And I've not had the memory of it, but I've had the feeling of it. Mm. Just and therefore I thought, well, how could I feel sad when I know I've been with her? Mm. And I do laugh, because in the first few days after she passed, and like I said, I couldn't feel anything about her around, and I was getting all these texts from friends of mine who are going, oh, I saw Kay in my dreams last night, or she appeared, you know, I got a sense of her in the garden, all that sort of stuff. And I wasn't getting anything, you know. And I'm looked at one day and say, hey, excuse me, like, I was your husband for 42 years, you know. I said, please go, hey, how are you? Thanks. But yeah, I suppose when you invest in your God nature as much as I have, then, I mean, this is just another state of consciousness. And that's why I suppose it's that sense of accepting that there's just life, and just life on other levels or states of consciousness, as I said before. So,
yes.
Yeah.
You had the...
That's all right. No, you speak.
Yes. So you had some friends that gathered around you, which must have made quite a difference at the time, I think, with the open door policy you're holding there, obviously.
I'm just so fortunate because, you know, I've got these amazing people in my life who, you know, we're like this family, and you know, everyone is just there for each other in every way. And the thing is, it's not necessarily let's sit down and talk about this sort of stuff. It's just, let's all hang out, you know, let's just get together. Let's just be there. And, you know, all of us have gone through certain things in our lives that, you know, we've all been able to step in and just be there for each other. And it's just that love and that honesty and I'm going to call it the common sense of it. You know, and I mean, it's like the last thing I want is people to sort of hold my hand and say, how are you, Blair? Sort of stuff. And, you know, it's just, I mean, that's okay for some people, but that's not how it is for me.
Yes.
And like one good friends of mine, Remy and Nida, and they've got a little 9-month-old who's my godson called Gabrielle. And they'll just sort of give me the baby. Here, hold on to the baby, you know. And Gabrielle loves his Uncle B, and he's just like, you know, and he's just all about life, you know. And just that sort of thing. So yeah, absolutely, it's essential. And I think that when you do go through certain things, I think it is important to think, okay, who's there for you? But sometimes you don't even have to ask that question, because I think that just sort of steps in, and let it in. That's what I say. Let let it in. You don't have to be reserved about it. And you know, a lot of people think, oh, you know, I don't want to bother people with what I'm feeling, and you know, all that sort of stuff. But you know, I think that if you don't allow people, and you're also denying people the need to love you, and also to put into practice their abilities and their knowledge, etc. And you know, we're all here serving each other. Goodness me.
Would you like to build on that if we were talking to people that right now were listening to this and they actually had some real experience of grief? Or even, do you think sometimes people are unconscious of a grief process around the different aspects of life changing and so on?
I think people tend to deal with their grief mostly through their emotions. So, of course, the human emotion of grief is quite raw. So, I do actually understand the concept of the weight of grief, and you know, I've heard about, you know, I've read about, you know, the people feel the heaviness, and I felt that, and it wasn't like dragging me down, but you just felt this energy was somehow around you, and you felt slightly compressed, and that's why you have to experience that, and it's a process. And then I just remember it lasted maybe a week, and then one day it just disappeared. You know, it just wasn't there anymore. And yet, just thinking about what we were saying before about friendships and people there to support each other, I think when you have that love around you, that helps you to carry through that weight, because it's a sort of perhaps a metaphorical way of saying you're being carried by these people, and because you feel the weight of it, and so therefore they're carrying you, so that you don't have to feel the weight in quite the same way. And look, obviously, each individual has to experience what they experience, and I think it's all to do with the deals that we make as individuals, and that's why you have to respect that, you know, as Tabaash says, you know, people are just gods doing it their way, and there's no right nor wrong way of expressing or experiencing grief. However, I think each of us has what's natural to us, and so therefore, for some people, it's natural to want to keep it to themselves, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. And I'm just thinking about a friend of mine whose son passed. He was in a plane accident, and they were farmers. And when his son passed, he just went up into the hills. You know, and whatever he did up there, he did up there. Whether he just yelled and screamed and yelled and cried, or stayed in silent, or herded the sheep, whatever. You know, but for him, he had to create his own process to empty himself of what he was actually feeling. And so for some people, they're not particularly comfortable in sharing their emotions and their grief. And I don't believe that's a thing about repressing. I think that's just what's natural to them. And yet, I think it's important that you find a way of saying what you're feeling, whether that's through, you know, people do funny things like they just go and bake, or write, or they go to the gym and you know, do major exercises. You know, it's like, let's turn what I'm feeling into something. And of course, you know, if you're creative, I mean, history is full of examples of people's grief in art and music and sculpture, and you know, all of that. You know, it's people have turned what they felt. It's like that song "Tears in Heaven."
Yes.
Yes, so that was, you know, the musician's
Eric.
Eric Clapton when his son died, and a little baby, and so, you know, he turned what he was feeling into that music. And so, you know, it's all about what we were saying before. The natural state of life is to be clear. So it's very much about, you know, let's do something with this. Let's not waste my experience, because it's still life and it's still experience. And so, you know, when you experience what you do, it's probably just sit down quietly and ask yourself, okay, what's natural to me here? What feels natural to me here?
Mm.
That might just be for that day. But it's really quite interesting because the other day I was driving to the supermarket, and it was nearby where Kay used to live when she was in care. And I hadn't even given the place a thought at all. But then, I don't know, it was the day, it was a nice summer day, and it made me think about the days that I would go up there and take her out of the communal area and wheel her out into the gardens, and we would sit in the sun, and she would just experience fresh air and sunshine, and she would sleep or just stare at me or whatever. And then suddenly, it wasn't sadness, but I got this overwhelming feeling of absolutely missing her, and it was quite impactful, actually. I had to pull over. I wasn't emotional, but it was just this sense of missing her. And I think afterwards I was thinking, it was just such a nice reminder of that sharing we had, sitting out in that garden, and then just the simplicity of it. And other some good friends of mine are very, very good musicians. One particular guy, he's a well-known cellist here in New Zealand, and he and his partner were down in Wellington, and so he had brought his cello with him, and so he sat in the garden with Kay, where he gave her own little private concert, basically, as he sat there and played all these beautiful cello pieces and things.
Oh.
And again, I remember that, and I was just thinking, wow, I'm feeling life here. And it's good to do that. It's good to feel that you miss that person, but it's good to remember that it's just life, and that will probably happen again at some point.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just thinking the other day that it might have been different for me if Kay had a sudden passing, because she'd been in care for 4 years. So that period of time, I must have gone through a lot of excuse me, processing and relieving and release. So there was a form of grief that I would have gone through during that process. So finally, when she did pass, perhaps the impact wasn't so great because I'd already worked through a lot, and also, there was an aspect of her that had already gone, and so I'd got used to that as well. It's reminded me of something I wrote the other day, which is when Kay died, then the part of me that was aligned to her also died, because I didn't need to be that person anymore. I didn't need to engage with that story anymore and those emotions anymore. And I think that's actually a really important point to make, that when someone goes from our lives, the part of us that was aligned to that person also goes too. And I think it's as part of our process to perhaps relinquish that role because it has no more use anymore. But of course, human emotions, I need to hold on to the memories. I need to hold on to that experience. I need to hold on to that. But I think that's quite counterproductive. It's not about holding on to anything. I think it's allowing everything to be there, but then not allowing yourself to anymore have that emotional alignment that's not necessary anymore.
It does seem that in doing that, it liberates everyone, and perhaps there's future collaborations that are built on a newness or a new creativity.
Yeah. Well, when you said that, I thought, well, it's rather like, okay, well, that's a relationship that we used to have. And so now, that's based on what we were, but now it's different now. So now we create a new relationship. And so my, what's the concept? It's like my marriage with Kay, my relationship with Kay, everything that transpired happened to someone we used to be together. And now she's spirit. So now our relationship is all about soul to soul and developing, that connection. And that's exciting.
Yes. I think your new book is also exciting. I hope we haven't given all of that book out today.
I haven't, but
I think a book like that is a wonderful journey for people, isn't it? Just to
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just it's my story. It's a story. It's a story that people can relate to or not. And anyway, I can feel Mr. T tapping on my shoulder. Says, "Excuse me, what about me?" so, so
so yes. So we're gonna have the good fortune, I suppose, to be able to hear Tabaash, and Blair is a trance channel for Tabaash. Is there anything you want to say about that before we begin?
oh gosh. Well, I've been channeling Tabaash well over 30 years. Uh, it's just part of my life. It's what's normal to me. The way Tabaash uses my body, it's like it's his. And spirit is able to communicate through people to remind them that there's so much more. And I think we're all very fortunate to be able to, in this time in the history, have the availability of souls like Tabaash and others that are working, on the planet at this particular point. I mean, in the old days, it was frowned upon or looked upon as something that was sort of either spooky or counterproductive or crazy or whatever. But as doors have opened up and we've become a lot more sophisticated in our understanding about how spirit works and how God works, we've got this availability to information, to life. That's what they're doing. They're giving. It's not just about giving connections with people who passed over. I think the body of the work that's happening at this particular point is very much about encouraging us to access the power of life, and then turn that into our new ways of thinking and feeling and being, etc. And a lot of people think about spiritual things, and they tend to look at it purely from the point of, I need to contact my dad or my grandmother or all that sort of thing. And whereas it's it's more to me about, well, okay, I've got the availability of all of life. What can I do with it? To secure my position as the soul in my body, and therefore make who I am work better for me. To me, that's really what it's all about. It's the development of life on all sorts of different levels. So, okay, I'll bring Tabaash. So,
thank you for sharing everything, Blair.
It's a pleasure. Okay, and I'll say goodbye later. Okay, bye for now. Bye. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Tabaash. Thank you very much, and welcome on behalf of everyone that will view this.
Pleasure to be able to talk to you all again. So why don't you hit me with your questions?
Yeah, Tabaash, I was actually wondering if you'd be so kind as to give us an introduction of yourself.
Oh, all right. Well, my full name is Tabaash Salam Maham. And when I was in the physical, I lived in what is or was called Sumeria. And the Sumerian area is today of what you people know as Iraq, Iran. And I was just a man who understood the higher nature. And by aligning to that, as Blair was saying before, gives you access to life. And so when you go to higher nature, you go to the part of you that has all the answers. And so I just evolved with that concept, and I brought the principles that I gathered and made them a part of my life. And so, I did not set myself up as some big teacher or anything of that nature. I just lived my life in the concept of mind, body, and spirit. And therefore, obviously, in my connections with other people through my lifetime, of course, I would share my feelings. I would share my perspective. And so it was a good life. It was a basic life. But it was the life where I understood the concept of we are all God. And we have access to all of life, all of times, which of course, in human nature now, this is more than ever a time to be aligned to the idea of your higher nature, of your God nature. Obviously, not at the cost of your human nature, but more from the perspective of directing your human nature from a higher perspective. And, life is full of formulas. And yet, if you look through history, some of these formulas are no longer productive. Formulas that represent conflict, formulas that represent fear, formulas that represent dissensions and disharmonies, formulas that take people away from the well-being of mind and body and spirit. And so, obviously, because of what's occurred on Earth with the virus, if you look through human history, human nature has always created a catalyst to create certain changes, social changes, economic changes, political changes, spiritual changes. Unfortunately, when you look back on human history, that's tended to be through war, tended to be through some form of conflict that has made human nature wake up and change things. So from the perspective of spirit, we find it exciting and interesting that here, for the very first time ever, human nature has been able to create collective change without a war. So this is a really good indicator of the burgeoning spirituality that is now more prevalent. And so you are seeing the evolution of the soul. And so as the soul evolves, which is happening for all beings, you yourself are going through your own levels of disclosure. You are going through your own levels of dismantling, but you are also experiencing, creating. You've turned on more lights. And when you turn more lights on, you see more. And yes, there's this period of transition, because as this situation has occurred, it's never happened before. So the governments are truly out of their depth. And this is why there's been this uncertainty of how to deal with the circumstance and the situation, because they've never been in a position where they knew what to do. They're not prepared for anything of this nature. And so everybody is rather, what do you call it? You're like guinea pigs. And it's like a big experiment. Or should we try this? Should we do this? What if this works? What if this doesn't work? It's a positive thing, even though it may not seem that way. And yes, there is loss of life. And yes, there are all these people who are losing their jobs and all of this sort of stuff. It's part of the process. And as the process unfolds, what you should all be seeing is what is good about me, what is powerful about me, what are my choices. You can easily stay locked into this is what's happening to us. But as I like to say to people, life is not something that's happening to you. Life is something that's happening because of you. Because of the way you think, because of the way you feel, because of the way you're acting, because of the way that you're living, you're creating your life. And so if you look at this purely from a perspective of your individuality, then it becomes easier to make the changes rather than get caught up into the wave of look at what's happening to us all. It's more, okay, I'm participating in this historical event. What am I going to do with it? How am I going to experience it? How will I use this as a platform for my own development, my own growth? So how can I profit from this? Everybody profits from everything. And so when one sees it from that perspective, regardless of your situation, even if you are locked down, like so many countries are, and your freedoms are curtailed, or you're here in New Zealand where no one is locked down, And it's pretty much life is normal, but not to be complacent about that. For you're very, very much in the power of the now at this point. And it's not that you don't have futures, but you're having to be conscious of the futures, what one is wanting to create. And I think that, getting into an energy like that, Blair was talking before about states of consciousness. And it just reminded me of when someone asked me the question about heaven, and they asked me to explain the place called heaven. And as I said, heaven's not a place. Heaven is a state of consciousness. So basically, heaven is the highest result of any experience that you have. So one can have lots of heavens. So how many heavens can one person experience in one day? Many. You can have the heavenness of happiness, the heaven of harmony, the heaven of getting through that day, the heaven of being peaceful with yourself, the heaven of attending to your studies, the heaven of getting through that business meeting. Obviously there is the heaven that you go to when you pass out of your bodies, but that's just one of the many heavens. And so if you think about with the way things are at this point, is it not important to create heaven on earth right at this point? And so I think it's a time to define differently what heaven is. And again, it's a very individual experience. Humans are used to looking at heaven only as the place when you die. And yet, as I just said before, how many heavens can you experience just in one day? And that's a good thing to be able to create, because what that does, it's training you up to be involved with the ultimate energy all of the time. So you could say the God energy is an ultimate heaven. It's an ultimate frequency. So when you're involved in investing in that sort of frequency, then you're involved in the power of creation all of the time. And you got access to all that power. Therefore, you are always in heaven. And therefore, you will always get results, be it intellectually, physically, mentally, spiritually, whatever. You will always get the results that you want, because that's what you recognize. You recognize that ultimate vibration. And so with the dismantling of social consciousness as humans have known it, economic consciousness, etc., then it's making way for this different frequency, which allows you access to heavens that up to this point you've not been able to access. They've always been there, but your frequencies were not resonating to be able to feel that frequency, understand that frequency. Now more people are. So it's rather like a massive reboot, like a computer reboot that's occurred. And therefore, you've now got the availability of more of source power within you, flowing through you now, which means that you're able to download information and feelings and energy that up to this point your physiology wasn't able to sustain, but now it can. And therefore, you're literally channeling through you all this new way of thinking, this new way of living, this new way of aligning with source. And in simple terms, it just comes down to what I said before. Life is happening because of you. So if each day you stay conscious of your day structure, what is possible, then you can direct the energy. But you have to be very present. You can't think of it from the point of, I can't wait for this to be over. Instead, you've got to accept, okay, this is the situation, this is how I am with it, this is what I can do with it. So if you're sitting there thinking, oh, I can't wait for this to be over and done with, and this is just terrible and all that sort of stuff, then you just get swirled into an energy which just brings you down. And that creates the vibration of conflict within yourself, because you have this conflict of interest that goes on between you and that vibration. And so I think that probably one of the most important concepts at this point in human history is acceptance. Acceptance of the present circumstances, acceptance of your thoughts, of your feelings, of your ideas, of your attitudes. Because if you can't accept, how is it that you can change? Because when you get into acceptance, then straight away you become a much better observer of all the other infinite possibilities that are laid out before you. And of course, not acceptance keeps you in a state of conflict. And therefore it just keeps dragging things out until invariably, dissension is created. And that was proved most recently with the storming of the Senate House in America. People not able to accept, and therefore, creating conflict as an answer. Of course, never works. So human nature, I think, is now in a position where collectively they do not want to recognize conflict as a way of evolving. So.
Interesting. It seems to be both a skill or a choice and a practice at the same time.
Well, that's what awareness is. It allows you to be aware of what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what you're doing. It allows you to have choice. And when you are aware, you're also conscious of the implications of how you live that awareness, how you practice that awareness. And so many people may believe they are aware, but how are you living that awareness?
I received some wonderful 2 questions from children, which I'd love to share. One from a 14-year-old who said, how does a child do more when they feel intense energy, when they're aware of, they seem to be quite conscious, aware of energies changing and strong energies. How do they work with that, and how do they do more? How can they help more? Actually, was the question as well.
I think the answer to that would be what I was saying before. Whether you're a child or an adult, it's to be very present and be an observer, and therefore in the circumstances that you find yourself in, be true to yourself, do what is possible, and don't feel pressured in regards to doing any more than is necessary. Do what you can, how you can, in the way that you can.
Yes, that without pressure seems very, very important.
Yes.
From a 12-year-old boy, actually asked simply, he happens to like fishing, but where have all the fish gone? And that made me think about what's the state of the environment at the moment, and the ecology and species.
Well, everything supports everything. Humans talk about natural biodiversity, and so everything is still there, but like everything, sometimes there's a little bit of a withdrawal, from certain areas and situations simply because of the vibration and the energy. And I think, even now, someone said to Blair the other day, isn't it funny? It's like everything's quite quiet, even the birds are quiet. And so obviously it's still there, but nature has its own way of holding its own breath as it observes, okay, what's going on? What's happening? And so, but also, I think if you look through human history, there's always been a place where things that are natural, animal nature, everything that is natural, it has a time where, I'm just trying to explain this, it pauses, because as it pauses for replenishment. And it's a bit like we just have to gather ourselves together a bit here and then look at the energy and look at the circumstances. So it's actually quite interesting, because from a point of the whole biology of things, it is where new species are created and old species die out. And it's a bit like saying, oh, whatever happened to that species of fish? It just seemed to disappear. Was it did. And it's all pertaining to the different frequencies and energies. So it's going to be interesting over the next 10, 20 years. Scientists are going to be discovering new species, plants and animals, insects, and but also a new species of human nature is being created. So it's a bit like, when the energy pauses, it just aligns everything with that frequency. And therefore, it's creation consciousness seen before your eyes. And this is a cycle that has always happened. There's always been periods in the history of the planet within people as individuals where there are quiet moments. And in that quiet moment, you are basically detaching yourself from the old frequencies and then bringing in the new energy. It's a bit like going, oh, excuse me, I'm just going over there and change. So you just go into the changing room, you come out completely different. And that's what the fishes are doing. That's what trees and animals are doing. That's what humans are doing. You're all in the changing rooms of life, and you're turning into something different to align with the new frequencies. It's a good thing. It's a good energy.
So interesting. We've talked in the past together about space and how do people accept the space in their life, and we've talked about people don't know what to do with space, or how do people experience space at the moment?
When you mean space, do you mean out there or space?
I know a little bit related to what we just talked about, actually, when suddenly there's not so much to do, or you don't have to do anything and you've got space in your life. What's
that do? It's a good time to pay attention to who am I? Where am I standing? What do I feel about myself? What are my qualities? What makes sense to me? What's natural to me? So when you have space, space isn't something about I have to do something with this. It's about let's just stand still for a moment and look at what feels the most natural thing for me to do. And I think when you stand in that place, that's where you really get a sense of what you want to invest in. And it's good to be productive. And as I always say, every day follow the formula of life, mind, body, spirit, and ensure that by the end of the day you feel you've achieved something in each of those areas. And that doesn't have to be a major thing. And I think with this space that is being created, it's getting people back to basics and getting back to what is actually natural. So perhaps it's more natural now to go for a walk somewhere, because you can't go to the cinema, or you can't hang out with your mates, or you can't go to the pub, or you can't go to your gyms and dance classes and all that sort of stuff. You can't go to all the things that fill up your life, and then suddenly you're finding yourself at home. And I've talked to people who been reading like 4 books a week, and they hadn't been reading a book for years because they've been so caught up into other stuff, or picking up that paintbrush again and doing the renovations on the house, or baking, cooking, things like that. Blair just made a whole lot of pots of strawberry jam the other day, because he found a whole lot of strawberries that were quite cheap. He said, I'll make some jam. So he did. And lots of people are doing stuff like that. They're attending to life. There's a difference between attending to life and filling life up. And so when you attend to life, then you catch your breath. You suddenly find the moments to do your meditations and to chat to your partners and to homeschool the kids, to participate. You're participating differently, and so I think of it as getting back to basics, because human nature has created so many rules and structures about what they believe life is all about and should be all about, and then finally they realize, well, in fact, it doesn't matter if we don't do that. It doesn't matter if we can't take the kids to Australia this year for holiday. Instead, we'll just go on a roadie around New Zealand or whatever. Or we'll just stay at home and have barbecues and enjoy our time and company and the family around us, and things that humans used to do. That's my answer. That one.
Wonderful. I'm conscious of our time together on this recording. How are we placed there, Tabaash?
Okay, just keep asking me and I'll go.
Okay.
But, yeah.
in the past, some years ago, I know we talked. You put something out there about the shift of balance of positive and negativity in humanity, and it had gone past that sort of 50%, whereas previously it was actually a little more negative. How do you see that at the moment?
Oh, look, it's definitely the prevalent energy now. I know there are people who would disagree with this, but the prevalent energy now is more to do with higher consciousness.
Mm.
You know, so higher consciousness is a prevalent energy now. Lights are being turned on, and people, you know, using that word again, have awareness. And I think human nature just does not want to accept negativity, does not want to accept, you know, aggression and conflicts and, you know, those types of vibrations anymore. You know, and they want harmony, they want peace, they want the lights on, they want to see.
Mm.
So this whole time of, you know, humans have been talking about disclosure. Well, it is. It's like all the lights are turned on, therefore you're seeing. But then what you have to do is that you see what you see, and then it's, which is really what 2021 is all about, was, or having seen it, now what do we do with what we see? And obviously you can't rely on your old systems and regimes anymore, because that's happened to everything you used to be. So now you're all brand new. And it's like, oh, we can't use what was as a reference point anymore. So therefore we have to create new reference points. Or which one shall we create? Well, let's create reference point that makes us joyful and happiness and working together and in harmony and adventurous and spiritual. So all these new reference points are being created. And as they are created, it's a great collective platform for human nature. And okay, yeah, you're still seeing a bit of dismantling of the old regimes. And you know, those who, you know, want to hold on to power, but they can't. And I got an interesting picture. And I saw, you know, when you were at school and they had the ropes that people had to climb up.
Oh, yes.
And so what I saw was all these ropes. And I saw all the leaders of all the countries. And they're all having to climb the ropes. And some just got to the top and down straight away. So it's like, yep, did that, then let's get on and let's work together. And then you got those who it's like, I'm not climbing up that rope, you know, and then you get others who just have no strength in them at all, and they can hardly pull themselves up at all. So it's just like a metaphor for the challenge about who's got it, who's not got it.
Mm.
And then you are those who, you know, at the top, and then suddenly they can't hold on anymore, and they get all these rope burns on their hand. Like,
Can't let go and can't move up.
yeah, totally. And so, but this has had to happen because so much of the old politicking has been based on vibrations that had to do with even like 50 years ago, and old methodologies and doctrines and rules, and, you know, people's need to be power hungry, despotic dictatorships, all that sort of stuff. You know, human nature en masse has outgrown that sort of way of being.
Mm.
And yet, you know, it's what has held things together to a certain degree, but only because there was nothing to replace it with. And this is what humanity is doing now. So you're seeing the evolution of all those different systems. And it's a process. You can't think of it in time zone. It's a process.
Mm.
And that's where anyone alive at this particular point, remember, you chose to be a participant in human history now. And so you wanted to be a part of the dismantling time. You wanted to be aware of the rawness of all of this. And okay, whether you choose to have other incarnations on this planet or not in the future is a choice. And so when you do, you'll come onto the planet in, you know, quite a different way, and with different systems, different energies, and different ways of working together, basically.
Mm.
You know, when you look at, you know, the young people of this time, with their knowledge, their spirituality, their respect. They come onto the planet with so much respect for humanity and love. And whereas, your generation, Blair's generation, you're the remnants of the old frequencies. And so, your parents, your grandparents, they were still involved in very, very third dimensional frequency. Whereas, anyone now is more fourth, fifth dimensional frequency. So you just can't help but go through life with all the lights turned on.
It does seem that we don't need to sort of have hate for people that are strongly representing the old energy, because it seems that they've got their own evolutions as well. Would that be accurate?
And don't even pity them, and just accept them. And what's that old adage? Every dog has its day. Literally. And so, it literally is about being very present and knowing how important it is to relinquish what was. It's not, relinquishing doesn't mean forgetting. It just means, oh, put that down. It's like Blair was talking about Kay, so he's relinquished his relationship with her, but he won't forget her. And so it just becomes a part of your life experience. So when you look at the way that the world is, you don't forget what the world has been. You don't forget anything, but you relinquish it. And then gradually, as you progress, you realize that you don't have to use that as a reference point anymore. Simply, it's just natural to keep evolving and natural to be clear of what was, because you don't want to be influenced by, stuff that happened, 100 years ago. And I mean, if you look at any system that tries to maintain the rules and the structures of, what was, then they're going to head for trouble, because, there's always going to be new ways of thinking and new ways of feeling and new ways of being. It has to happen. The earth itself does that. It keeps on replenishing itself and changing and growing and creating and relinquishing all of the time. It's what's natural. And because you're natural, you're no different. You're no different from the tree and the oceans and the skies and all that sort of stuff. So, it's like when Blair was talking about Jonathan Livingston Seagull. And so Jonathan wanted to see how high he could fly. And all the other gulls thought, well, you're crazy, man. What are you thinking about? Why can't you just be a normal seagull and just keep to the boundaries? No, I want to go up there. And that's what he did. He'd go higher and higher and higher and higher until eventually, at the end of the story, he found the light. And this is what human nature feels within themselves. I just want to keep going higher and higher and higher and higher. And then, of course, there's no end to anything. You just, once you find a higher, you're going to look for the next higher.
In spirit, are you, may I ask, are you experiencing like that too, in spirit?
Of course, because spirit, is just a level of consciousness. And yet all of life is consistently being created. So there's always more levels of consciousness, to be created. And it's all relative to where you're positioning yourself, because, with where you are now, you have a certain understanding about that. For some people, it's like they would just look at you and go, huh? And they just, it's not something they can conceive, because their frequencies aren't able to be receptive to that. And so, but at some point they will be. And that's a great thing, always conceive of yourself in the highest light. Therefore, you're always standing in the strongest position. And then that just gives you the heavens that you can make available to you. And that's why, a good practice for everybody who's watching and listening would be, at the end of the day, say to themselves, well, how many heavens did I live in today? And just see, which of those heavens are the ones that stood out more. And keep doing that. And when you wake up in the morning and say, oh, great, I've got another chance to create lots of heavens. And go out there and do that. And that's a good note for me to end. So,
well, thank you so much, Tabaash. Wonderful.
Pleasure, absolute pleasure.
I'm sure we've all had a great time, if I can speak for everyone.
All of you. You are the best. It's not about finding the best. You are the creators. So create. And as you do so, then stand still with it, practice acceptance, but also each day practice allowing. Today, what shall I allow? In my greatness, in my goodness, in all my qualities, what shall I allow? And no necessity to be hard on self or try anything. You're God's. And so stand still. Whatever your circumstances are, stand still and remember, you all have choice. So blessings to you all, and no doubt we will speak through the year. Okay, I'll bring Blair back. Bye for now.
Thank you, Tabaash.
Hello, Paul.
Hi, Blair. Welcome back.
You just have a bit of...
Yeah. Did you have a nice experience coming back into the body there?
Oh, yes, just a nice little, how shall I put it? It's like you're on a little bank on the river and it's a bit slippery and you're just sliding into the water. When you're kids, reminds me of when used to up in Auckland and hang out with some friends near this little river stream. It was really quite muddy, and we used to run and get into the mud and go into the water.
Yeah. Well, let's hope it's nice and warm water there today, is it, in New Zealand?
Yeah, it's a nice day. Actually, beautiful. It's nice summery. Yep. So go and have some outdoor time, and just go. The beach is just down the road from me, so I'm gonna maybe have a little bit of a wander down there.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, good. I did want to say thanks for presenting and sharing so openly, and then also bringing through Tabaash today this episode, and thank you viewers also for joining us. I think it's a really lovely collective energy just to share in life together.
Absolutely, yeah. And when you say that, I'm thinking probably more than ever how important it is to establish that sort of alignment, whatever your circumstances are, whether it's literally, like here, I'm lucky because I can hang out with my mates and spend time with people. But if you can't do that, then, talking online like this, or, let's not ignore each other. So.
Yeah. Well, I think we've put out something really wonderful for people, and I really encourage people to share this or benefit from it. And it's going to be out there for quite a while, I guess, Blair.
I suppose so.
Well, I think we've come to the end of our time, and I just want to thank you very warmly, Blair, for your time, and just so pleased to create this with you.
Oh, look, I just love you, Paul, and just love being able to do this. And it's such a great platform to be able to just to share, to love.
Thank you.